Clothing is a basic element of our everyday lives, but it can also be a lens for looking at the social and political landscape of our world. It may be something we don't think about much. Some people just wear approximately the same clothes every day, maybe whatever their school or work uniform dictates. But for others, like fashion designers, influencers, retailers, trend forecasters, etc., fashion might be pretty much all they think about. Clothing is an everyday object, but also a status symbol, an art form, a technology, a way of drawing lines between different groups, and so on. Some of us are lucky enough to just treat fashion as something fun to explore, a form of self-expression with, in today's economy, nearly unlimited options and combinations. But a lot of us struggle to find things that fit, or align with our gender identity, or work with our various accessibility needs. Historically, certain cultural objects and styles have been deemed unprofessional, or even outright banned and eradicated by colonial forces. Not to mention the deplorable conditions in which so much of our clothing is produced, only to be thrown away after a few wears. Fashion can be everything from a fun hobby to a site of deadly violence. We can only cover so much in a single podcast interview, but I wanted to set the stage by encouraging you to think about all the things that clothing can be. Our culture, especially online, is hyper-saturated with all these facets of the fashion world. Clothing means so many different things to different people. So what should it mean for us solar punks? How could our utopian fashion allow for art and self-expression, meet the needs of diverse groups, and support an economy of solidarity rather than exploitation? Let's take fashion as a lens, a case study, a tiny piece of the puzzle that is imagining and building a better world. How can we start prefiguring a new relationship to fashion, one that aligns with the better world we want to create while working within the limitations of the present? Well, I just so happen to know someone who's doing exactly that. I met AJ in our freshman year of university, where we bonded over a shared interest in cosplay and, trans stuff, for lack of a better term. Since then, AJ started a successful online business selling queer, magical, and accessible fashion. He also has a nonprofit, Queering the Spotlight, that provides opportunities for diverse fashion designers and models. There are a lot of issues with the fashion industry, from labor rights to a huge carbon footprint to the lack of accessible options for diverse bodies and abilities. AJ has a lot of insight to offer into the problems with the industry, and how he's navigated fashion as a trans man with disabilities. In this episode, AJ offers a great critical introduction to the fashion world, and we cover some things you may not have even thought about before. We'll also hear how his design process challenges harmful norms, and some awesome ideas for where fashion could go in the future. But before we get started, I gotta do my usual ask. I would really like to be able to turn podcasting into my career. So if you like this show and want to hear more, please consider supporting me with a donation. Also, rating and reviewing the show and sharing it with your friends are all super helpful. Now stay tuned as I explore solar punk and accessible fashion with AJ, right after the break. You're listening to Solar Punk Now, the podcast about politics, science, art, philosophy, and whatever else it'll take to get us out of this mess. Join us, and let's demand a brighter future together.
So my name is AJ. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the artist behind Pocketbean. I make accessible fashion. Primarily, I hand make pieces, but in this last year, I've started working with larger manufacturers to bring my products to more people at more affordable prices. But yeah, I'm a fashion designer. I run a nonprofit where I bring art spaces to queer folks in my community. I do a lot of witchcraft stuff, but I am primarily just a witchy artist.
So how did you get interested in fashion design? I know when we lived in the dorms together, or like when we were talking before that, we both shared an interest in cosplay. Did it kind of start from there, or?
It definitely started from cosplay. My mom was also kind of a fashion designer. She lived in Hong Kong for a long time and worked in one of the places that manufactures clothing. So she had a like she would teach me how to sew when I was a kid, but I really was not interested in learning from her like at all. There were so many unfinished projects that I had as a kid. And then in high school, I got into cosplay, and that's when I started teaching myself how to sew. I didn't want anyone else to teach me because I'm just not good at like learning that way. I wanted to teach myself, and that just kind of grew. But I think I would have gone to an art school or fashion school had I been able to draw. But I had some like thing in my brain that was like, oh, I can't draw. I can't go to art school or fashion school. So I went to UCSC instead, trying to get a law degree. We see how that works out.
Wow, I did not know that. Is that still something you ever think about, or is it really just like what you can do in fashion now?
I had a teacher tell me something in high school was that you can always do both. And I am a huge like activist, and I want like actually this is my today is my 8-year anniversary from winning Youth Leader of the Year in the state of Maine. I won that in 2015, which feels wild. So I always knew I wanted to be an activist, and at the time I was going to do it by going to law school. And I got into the UCSC has a special 3-year law
Mm,
program. So they do a
yeah.
shortened undergrad and then they do a law degree or whatever. And so I got into that program, but then it just burned me out and I decided to switch. I think that's where my nonprofit Queering the Spotlight ties in for me is I can still create art and activism at the same time. And there's also a lot of like really amazing things we can do through art because there's already so many amazing like we've got equality centers and stuff like that, and they are very focused on the laws and making the structures better, but I don't find that there's many places focused on making daily lives and like simple joys better. So I like the fact of like, okay, yeah, we've got these people helping us with like the things we need to survive. Let's focus on a little bit on like the things that we want, the things that bring us like joy in life. And that is so much of that is art. So that's kind of where I like shifted my focus to kind of be able to do both.
Got it. Yeah, that sounds pretty solar punk to me.
Yeah.
So, the term you used was accessible fashion. Is that what you would call it instead of diverse fashion? I wasn't sure what.
Yeah, I've never heard of someone use the term diverse fashion, but I kind of love it. I usually say accessible fashion, even though it should just be fashion, but fashion as it stands is not very accessible. When I use the term accessible, I mean like accessible in the terms of like actually being able to get it. Like it's readily available to you, it's affordable, and then accessible in like that people of all abilities can use it. Which I think that to for something to be truly accessible, it has to be customizable or custom made. Like I don't think it's truly that possible to put up like a piece of clothing out into the open market and call it accessible. I tend to, I don't know if this is a controversial view, but I am somebody who like I don't strive to be accessible to everybody when I make one product. Like I have these backpacks that I make, and anybody can buy them, and if they love that, great. But I made them for wheelchair users, and so like when I focused my research on it was how can this help wheelchair users? And I've had folks who have been like, oh well, this doesn't work for me. Can you change it to this? And I will happily design a new bag that works for that group of people, but changing some designs would then hinder and take away from the accessibility of it working for wheelchair folks. So I think that's something that, especially, I'm big on TikTok for some reason, and a lot of people on TikTok don't seem to understand that. They think that when someone
Mm,
makes that's accessible, that it means it's for everybody, and like that just truly, unless it's custom made for you, that truly isn't possible.
yeah, I no, I totally get that. I mean, you're just one person too. Like, I totally understand as a small creator not being able to please everybody, and
Yeah,
I don't think we should try. Like,
absolutely.
inclusivity is important, but
Yes. And yeah, you're totally right. Like I'm one person, so I'm trying the best to do these things. But I still think there's power in having like a focused accessibility. Because again, I'm like anybody can choose to use or purchase my products, but like the backpack specifically, I'm like I made them for wheelchair users, so I'm not gonna make a change that would take away from them being able to use it. But I'll happily go and do something different that like works for other people. Because if you're gonna make something that works for everybody, it's just gonna be like a blob. Because you just can't. There's no way to please everybody.
A potato sack, maybe, unless that's, a problem for people with sensory issues. Like, there's no way to do
Exactly.
it.
So I think that's usually my piece of advice. Because I'll get some like artists or designers who reach out to me and they're like, "How do you make something accessible? Where do you start?" And I always say that I'm like, pick a group of people that you want as your audience. Because most mainstream large companies, when they're picking their audiences, they're like, oh, we want the wealthy 20-year-olds or something. We want like people of this specific measurements, no plus sizes, that kind of stuff. I'm like, no, don't do that. Be like, what's a group of people that I want to help, or what group am I in? Like I wanted to do those backpacks because I'm someone who uses a wheelchair sometimes. So it's like, how did I want to change those things and help me? And I think through that, there are tons of people who don't use wheelchairs who find the changes, the accessibility items really useful in their lives, and that is like fantastic. And then it becomes accessible for a lot of like different people. But I think that if you start off designing or creating something trying to please everybody, you're not going to get anywhere in that. But also recognizing that folks with disabilities, like oh, this is my favorite thing to talk about. The really tiny zippers on everything ever?
Yeah.
Literally everything has tiny zippers. I get people in my TikTok comments who are upset that I don't use the tiny zippers because I make accessible zippers, right? They're like large, have texture, easy to grab. And I'll get people who are like, oh, it ruins like the aesthetic, or I want my zipper to be hidden. And I'm like, have you been so brainwashed by society that you want to use this tiny little piece of metal that is hard to grab for anybody? No matter the ability, they're hard to grab and they're annoying and they're tiny. You can't tell me that having one that's fun shaped and a little bit larger doesn't help everybody in the world. But I get people who are like, they're very upset by that, and I find it really funny.
So we've been dancing around the bags for a while, but I'd love to get some specifics on uh, your design process, why these bags work, especially for wheelchair users, why other bags don't, and maybe just sort of like how you research and design a product for a group of people who might not be served by mainstream fashion.
Yeah, so at least for the bags, that was the first thing that I was ever manufacturing. So I knew I'd be able to offer it to a really wide group of people. I started with what I wanted to change about the bags that I already owned to help me as a wheelchair user. And those things right away were the zippers, because I struggle with my fine motor function, which is something that's super common with wheelchair folks. So it was the fact that the zippers were too small and that a lot of my bags don't stand up when I put them down, they'll just fall over. And then I made a TikTok video and I reached out and I was like, hey, what would you change about your bags if you could change something? And I had so many people responding, sharing so many different experiences they'd had and things that they wish they could change. And that influenced a lot of stuff. One of the big things that I was thinking about even before the video, but I got a lot of confirmation on, is how people put their bags on. Like we can pretty easily slide it on one arm, but the second arm you have to kind of like reach up and around you. And a lot of people can't do that. Like have reaching your arms above your shoulders or even just reaching them up at all can be really difficult. So I wanted to design the straps so that they can be put on in a lot of different ways. So the straps have 3 different ways that you can attach them. Having at least 2 ways is pretty common now on the bags made by small artists, which is becoming like super, super popular, especially through the pandemic. A lot of artists started making bags. So that's been amazing because they'll make bags that can be both backpacks and side bags. So being able to take the straps off at 2 points, it has become really common within that like small artist world. But this third strap, or this third release, is a quick release buckle that's in the middle of the strap. And this is not only great that you can literally take the bag off without like barely moving your arms. You just have to bring your hands up to your chest and you clip, and it can be off of you. And it's also a great way for people who, again, don't have a lot of upper body mobility to still be able to put the bag on, and they don't have to get their arms through a big hoop. So that was like a big thing that we changed. And I struggle with my eyesight a little bit, and a lot of people also were like, oh, like I really wish bags weren't so dark inside, because if you have a black bag, it always has a black inside. So we made a light colored inside with the stitching being a different color so you could see things more clearly. And that was a change we could do, again, for a wider range of people, but it didn't take away from the things we were doing to try to help folks in wheelchairs. The other big thing was we have little feet on our bags. Feet are really common on bags when they're like fancy, because it's meant to protect the bottom of the bag, but we made them so that our bags would just stand up. And then it was also the size of the bag. I wanted it to be large enough to carry like a lot of things, but also not too big that it would hit the wheels of a wheelchair. Same with the wings. They're all sized so they won't hit like most wheelchairs. I've heard one report from one person that it did hit their wheels a little bit, and I'm going to try to like test out some new sizing to hopefully fit their chair better. But everybody else that I've heard from, it's fit, which has been really nice. Yeah, I feel like I there are so many things that we did to like build the bag from the ground up, but it really was like, how do we make a bag that's really fun and fashionable and customizable, that's easy for a lot of different people to use? Because a lot of products that are aimed towards being accessible for disabled folks are bland and boring. And there's this common misconception that if, especially if you're in a wheelchair, but if you're using a mobility aid at all, you can't care about fashion for some reason, or you don't care about fashion. And some of that is like, yeah, because nothing is like made that's fun and fashionable for us. So we might look like we don't care about fashion. Same with, I got some comments from, um, I did one video about how folks who are blind or have vision impairment could use our bags a little bit easier. And I had comments from people being like, well, if they're blind, why do they care what it looks like? Why do they care what they
Oh
look
my god.
like? Why do they care what clothes they're wearing? And I'm like, because they do, like, they can care about those kinds of things. Just because they're not able to see it as well as you, they can still care about it. They can still like things. So I definitely like noticed this big problem, which I mean, we've always known it, but it's a big problem in society of people not seeing disabled folks as human beings. And it was nice that this project got so popular, both because it was very gratifying for me, and that was really nice to be like, cool, I'm hitting a need in this community that I belong to. But it also showed some really big corporations that there's a market there, and like they only care about money. So it's like, yeah, there's a market full of people who are willing to spend their money on these items if you were only just to like provide them. So that was like something I was happy about, and a lot of my accessibility reviews on TikTok have done really well. And I've heard from other artists as they design their bags that they think about what I've said about bags and and my bags and bags in general. And that's like made my heart so happy, because some people just don't think about it, but you don't think about it until you're like living it and experiencing it.
So we've talked a little bit about accessible fashion. I'm curious to hear more generally or broadly what your critique of inaccessible fashion would be, which I guess I would understand as sort of like mainstream fashion, whether it's the high end stuff or just going to Macy's or whatever, and they have such a limited range and accessibility, like you said, like that's something that big corporations just completely ignore, that people in general just ignore.
Yeah, it's funny. I do think it's a two-way street sometimes, because I think that some large corporations and companies will inadvertently make incredibly accessible clothing, but they don't think about it, and so they don't advertise it or market it that way. But for the most part, yeah, they're very inaccessible items. And I think it's because primarily large corporations, they just don't care. And we know they don't care. They don't care about us as people, and they don't care about the waste that they're producing in the world. They don't care about the money that they're losing because in their brains, it's somehow short term, at least, more cost effective for them to make 500 of an item for $1 and only sell half of it versus making 500 of an item that's more accessible at $3 and selling all of it. Like, they don't know how to do long-term math. um, a big problem that I have with mainstream fashion is when they, especially speaking as a designer, when they make plus size clothing, they just make it bigger, usually like width wise. They don't think about how people are three-dimensional beings. So you'll often get like skirts or shirts that are plus size, but they're like way too short because they're not thinking about how they need to make it longer as well as making it wider. And also just that people's bodies, like they different things are flattering on different bodies. There is so much, even the fact that a lot of stores, when you walk into them, have no plus size mannequins. And so it's like impossible to know what the clothing's going to look like on you unless you're like going and trying it on. There's no advertisement for it either. And it's always been wild to me because we're taught to believe that mainstream fashion tries to appeal to the most people. And yet, most people are plus size. And in the world in general, like especially by US standards, like where our plus sizes start is where most other countries are still in the like mediums or larges. So, especially by our standards, most people are plus size in our country. And it is wild to me that some force inside the industry has just chosen to ignore that fact. But I also know there's the psychological parts there where they're also trying to teach us that it's a bad thing that we have bodies that are bigger and that it's bad and we should try to attain all of this like slimmer, smaller fashion because that's what they want to offer to us. And that's what I also, ooh, okay, this is a very big thing for me too. So I make custom clothing and I don't charge a difference depending on like what size you are. It's if you order a dress from me, it's going to be the same price no matter what size you are. The only stuff that brings up the price is if you want a bunch of like added detail. And I've had people ask me like, how is that possible? How can I run a business under this? At the most, and I'm talking like at the most, when I'm working with the most expensive fabrics, it's maybe $20 extra in fabric costs for me to make something for a plus size person versus a straight size. And then maybe an hour of extra time of my work. And I get people who are worried about it. They're like, oh, so you're just undercharging plus size folks. And my solution to this is actually I'm overcharging straight sized folks. So I sell dresses right now at 180. If I were to make a dress for a straight size person, I think I could like do, I don't know, I could even bring it down to like 160, 150. I choose to charge them 180 because 180 is the most that everything would cost for like a average, like my average customer, which most of my customers have like a chest size about 55 to 60, which is pretty high up on the plus size range. And that's what I charge. And if I have somebody like in my messages getting upset because I quote unquote overcharge them and they, part of me is like, I don't want you as a customer anyways, because you don't understand how the entire world is making fabric and clothing and everything for you and priced for you, that I think you should be fine paying an extra $20 so that somebody else can also buy the same dress as you and not get charged more. I do that everybody, and I'm pretty honest about that. And I've actually never had anybody truly have an issue with it, which has been really nice. And I also do a thing where I do tend to charge less on my custom handmade clothing than other people would because I want to make it accessible and affordable in that way. And what I do is I bring up the price a little bit on like my jewelry and my other handmade stuff. And then over the whole thing, it kind of evens out. And swinging back to like the mainstream fashion culture, um, a big critique I have of the mainstream fashion culture is fast fashion. Ironically, really expensive, like couture, big brand fashion houses, I usually have less of a problem with them because they're making smaller batches of like extremely detailed clothing. And the people who pay the price to get that usually wear them for years and years and years and years and years. Those kinds of pieces don't end up in landfills. If someone doesn't want to wear it anymore, it gets sold to somebody else. And it's hard because I blame consumers to a certain extent, but then it's also like we've been brainwashed to be this way. I don't know who it was, but I follow a fantastic creator that talked about how she saw a dramatic dip in her views when she stopped buying things because a really clickable video is, oh, my unboxing of this, or I just got these things. And so we've also psychologically tied in the content we like to consume with the buying of new things, which makes us want to go out and buy new things. And it's this like endless cycle. And also, we're buying relatively cheap, poorly made items that are usually made from folks who are underpaid or taken advantage of. And because we're buying clothes that aren't well made, they're not going to last very long. And then we just buy more and more and more. I personally don't have a problem with somebody buying stuff from Walmart or even from Shein. Someone can buy something from Shein, but they need to wear it until it's falling apart. That's kind of my like compromise with that because I do understand. I think that's the difficult thing with talking about fashion and talking about accessibility. I know that someone paying $180 for a dress that I made, I know that is so far outside of so many people's budgets. And I don't think anyone should shop at Shein, but I do understand that people deserve to have clothes they like, that they feel good in, that express their gender and their fashion sense at a price they can afford. What I have problems with is people who are like, this is my haul, and they do a new haul every couple weeks. I think that there's this compromise where you can participate in quote unquote fast fashion and make it slow fashion by wearing those pieces forever, like as long as you can, instead of having something and throwing it away. Um,
Right.
Even one of my friends, I kind of appreciate their loophole. They only thrift things and they only keep things in their closet for like a month or two, but they donate it back. So they do a constant cycle of thrifting, donating, thrifting, donating. And I'm like, okay, that's another loophole too. You know, none of their clothes are going into landfill. It's just going and cycling back in to the secondhand market. And that's a little bit better, generally better than buying something new and just throwing it away.
Right. It's avoiding that cycle of being put together by underpaid workers in an impoverished country, sent here for a month, and then sent to a landfill back in that same impoverished
Oh
country.
yeah, or sent even to the secondhand market that exists in those impoverished countries. That is something I want to talk about. There's a really big stigma against having stuff made in China. And I did a lot of research on this because the bags and the shoes that I sell are made in China. And I do a lot of research before I agreed to work with the manufacturer. But I'll get people who criticize me for it. And I have found that the mainstream view of working conditions in China is based around a lot of what we thought about them in like the 2010s. China has gone through like a complete overhaul of their regulations, and most, not all, definitely not all, but a large portion of the manufacturers there have really good working conditions, properly paid people, like significantly better than the US. Which again, I have people who are like, why don't you get stuff made in the US? And I'm always like, number one, there are no real manufacturers in the US. Like, there are no bag manufacturers, there are no shoe manufacturers. Most things, if it says made in the USA and it's from a company, it's prison labor. And people seem to still be like, oh, well, if something's made in the US, like it's so much better than being made in China. And especially for folks like me who are small artists, I'm like, the factories that we work with, we know they're at particular standards. And that's not just because we do our research, but also because those factories that are treating their workers poorly, that are not paying them correctly, that are like essentially operating illegally, we can't access those factories because those are ones are already owned by Apple. They're already owned by all these huge companies. They don't want to work with a small artist that wants to buy 200 pairs of shoes. They want to work with a company that wants to buy 10,000 pairs of shoes. So it's also that, like, you can get something manufactured in China and you can be working with a small business. Like, the folks who make my shoes, it's a team of 20 people, and the whole company is run by a husband and wife. I video chatted with these people. Like, I tried sending them a Christmas card, but then the postage was really bad. So I was like, I'm not going to send them a Christmas card. But yeah, that's kind of a thing that I find very interesting as I stepped into the world of manufacturing, was the overarching view about it. Especially because I could have said that I got my shoes made in like Milan, Italy, and people's perceptions would be totally different. Except that the workers in China are just as talented and skilled and deserve just as much as respect as the people in the factories in Italy. But there's that stigma and that like racism and xenophobia that happens when we say, oh, something was made in China. I think that's just like ridiculous. It's been a controversial topic every time I talk about it on the internet, but it's something that I feel like is so important because I never really thought about it before. I definitely judged some of my artist friends that outsourced things and had them made because I just didn't understand how they could know for certain. But a lot of the sites that we have access to as business owners, like, I literally know the floor plan of the factories. I know how many people work there. I know, they take, like, I know when their breaks are, like, when they take vacations and stuff. I like to know their names. Like, I know that's not something all artists do, but I like building a personal connection with the people that I work with, especially because the things I work with are so like particular and personal to me. And I really struggled to relinquish control for a while, but it's been a good experience.
Wow, so we've gone all over the place. I feel like this list of questions has just expanded. I'd love to talk a little bit more about gender. I mean, are you comfortable talking about like how your transness has influenced your
Yeah.
experience either with fashion or being a designer of fashion?
Yes. I definitely, that's something that drew me to fashion initially, was also that I am a trans man who likes to wear dresses. And I had to look at fashion from a very different view, or a very unusual view, because I like very feminine things, but I still experience dysphoria. But it's not, I guess, the quote unquote average dysphoria because I'm putting on a dress, and I think that would make some other trans masculine folks uncomfortable. So I would look at fashion in a very different way of like how it fits my body and how I want to style it. I met another trans guy yesterday who was asking me how I became comfortable wearing dresses again. And I can't I can't say for certain how I originally became more comfortable. I just knew that I loved how I looked in dresses. I felt very powerful in them and I just loved them. And when I came out, I think everyone expected me to be a really different person, but I was exactly the same because I'd always been this person. And I didn't want my love for like fashion and dresses to change because of that. I tried. I think I did a whole year or maybe even like 8 months or something where I threw out all my makeup. I didn't let myself get any dresses. I just was like, no, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna like medically transition. I'm gonna be binary. And I was so miserable.
That sounds really
So
depressing.
miserable. Oh my gosh, I was so miserable. It was awful. And when I finally started letting myself dress how I wanted to again, the confidence and power it brought back to me, it actually made me feel more comfortable in my gender. I stopped questioning myself even less because, like, I know that I'm a man. It doesn't matter what I'm wearing. But I was talking to this other trans guy, and he had some skirts that he wore before he came out, and he wants to wear them again. And my big suggestion was, I was like, don't try to style the skirts like how you used to style them. You got to look for positive masculine or male representation of like guys wearing skirts. And nowadays, that's so much easier to find than when I was like in high school trying to find that. It is so easy to just Google search like punk guy in skirt or grunge guy in skirt, and you will find men in skirts who are dressing in a very masculine way. Like, there are definitely guys who are like, oh, I want to wear a skirt in a feminine way, and that's fantastic too. But having that positive representation of someone who is the same gender as you wearing a unusual quote unquote clothing is so amazing. And especially as trans folks, we just don't have enough of that, but it's becoming more common, which is really nice. It's been a wild experience for me of like, I wear dresses a lot to conventions, and when I'm at a convention, like, I always use he him pronouns, but I if a stranger calls me she or they, like, that doesn't really bother me when I'm in a big dress or whatever. And it's ironic because I find that I will often get gendered correctly more often. Like, somehow me being in a dress and wearing typical feminine things, but like the energy I radiate, maybe I'm always like, I get he himmed all the time. I'm like, this is amazing. This is everything I want it to be. And I think that that is really also when we talk to cis people, like non trans folks, they don't seem to understand that. I'm like, it's really not about the clothes. A lot of time it's about the energy because our brains are wired to like assign someone a gender within the first like 2 seconds of seeing somebody, which sucks a lot, but that's just how our brains work. And so most of the time it's not the clothing, it's how your body is. It's the energy you radiate, it's your posture, all those things that signal gender. And so I also like to look at fashion from that point of view too. I'm like, if you're wearing the things that make you feel confident and powerful, you're going to radiate that. And that is going to click in with whatever gender that you are, in whatever way, like cis, trans, non binary, whatever. That kind of energy is just going to help you be yourself more.
So, while we're talking about energy, do you want to get into magic?
Yeah. Yeah. My gosh.
So, I was just gonna sort of lead into it a little bit. I mean, when you go check out your store, there's like definitely a big focus on accessible fashion, but there's also a lot of magic, a lot of spells. You can get spells infused into your pieces. Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff. So I'm curious why magic and witchcraft are important to you and why you incorporate them into your fashion.
Yeah. I was introduced to witchcraft my sophomore year of college. And it's actually what started Pocket Bean. And I was really depressed and dealing with a lot of mental health stuff. And I discovered sigil magic, which, if you don't know what that is, they're specific symbols that hold power and they're completely unique to the user. There's a couple different ways you can make them, but I like to take it like when I was first learning about them, I would take the word like you are loved. And I would take that word and I would bring it down to its basic like circle and line shapes, and then bring that down again to create like one symbol. And I'd put symbols like that around my room. And it was this reminder to me when it got like really bad that past me was looking out for future me and like cared. And that really carried me through some dark times in my life. And I carried it into Pocketbean, and I started making witchcraft necklaces for like self love, anti anxiety, and confidence. That was the first item I ever had that people like loved. Like it was what I was known for a while, was mental health magic. And I've always seen it as this tool to just help you gain an insight into the power you already have inside of you, which I feel like that's what fashion's for also. And there was a long time, well, I guess I still do it. When I work on commissions, if I'm making something like a witch hat, I can write stuff on the inside before I cover it with fabric, and I'd always write sigils there. And sometimes the person getting the witch hat would know about it, like if they maybe, because I'll post about it occasionally, but a lot of the times people don't realize that there's sigils in there. But I loved being able to put in all this love and positive energy directly into something that I was making and having somebody carried away with them. And I think I everything I do in my life, especially because I've been full time for the last almost 5 years now, I've just put in all of my intention magic into the pieces. And I think the product right now that's on my shop that has it has sigils on it. So it's one of the medical bags that I made. And I made that because I didn't have a good place to store my testosterone. So I liked the fact that it's something that's like useful for me, but it also has these witchcraft tendencies. And the same with, I guess, low energy witchcraft is a very accessible thing too, because as a disabled person, it's really hard to muster any sort of energy to do anything. I don't know if you've been affected by this specifically, but there's a huge back order or huge shortage on ADHD medications right now. And it's terrible. I've been off my meds for 5 weeks now, and oh, it has been terrible. It's just been like, I'm lucky that my fiance Ashton, he works full time with me. We run the business together now. I don't know what I would do if he wasn't like running stuff, because I can barely get out of bed, and it's just terrible. So that's really hard. It's really hard mentally on me. And something that I need for my own mental health is my spirituality. But I would have times, even before my medications went on shortage, like it's just hard to feel connected to the world. We get so caught up in like the grind and the hustle, and there's so many things going on, and I just didn't feel connected, and I needed to ground myself. And I do that with witchcraft. But if I didn't have the energy, then I was just stuck in this perpetual state of not feeling grounded. So I made the our most popular one right now is I make matches that are color magic matches, because every color has a certain correspondence. And so I infuse that with intention magic into the bottles. And then when I need an extra boost, I'm able to use the match without having to like use my own like energy. And it's been amazing again to know that there are other people who struggle with the same thing of needing that. That's been like a whole incredible experience of just being like, oh, I'm so not alone in these experiences. And I'm sad that other people experience them, but it's nice to find that community there too.
Yeah. I don't take ADHD meds anymore, but I will say, just like, I used to take them and I did withdraw from them, and it's fucking miserable. Like, I pretty much just like spent a couple months. I took a leave of absence from school. I was like, I'm doing this, but I'm not doing anything else. And
Yeah.
that's a privilege. I can't imagine like people who just aren't functioning right now because of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's hard because it's like I like to keep some of my life private because I've become such an online persona, which I don't like, but it happened. And so I don't advertise really that I've been struggling so much, but it's hard when I'm trying to like still run a business and have customer service and stuff, but then I'm like, I'm literally struggling to keep any thought in my brain at all. One of the things I recently started talking about when coming to design, and it goes back into like how do we make accessible designs, or like how do we change fashion for the better, which I guess there's two things I'm going to talk about. The first one is I always think that a product should have three reasons. And the first reason is going to be you want to put your art out in the world, you want it to exist and people to enjoy it. Second reason is always going to be that you need money to survive. I always ask artists, what's your third reason? With my backpacks, it was how do I make a wheelchair accessible bag that's fun and customizable? I made high heels for the first time, and it was like, how do I make fun high heels that don't hurt my feet? I have a friend that wanted to make button ups, but they were like, well, I don't feel like I have enough people who want, my art on a button up. And I was like, well, what do you want to change about button ups? And for them, they have a really big chest. They have a really big chest. So there's always that gap in the buttons. And I was like, great. So now, not only do you have people who like the art on your button up and choose to buy it, people who like your art in general and want to support you and are going to buy it, you have this whole new group of people that have the same problem as you that are excited to have a product that solves that problem. So it's a win-win on both sides with those kinds of things. And like we can totally make art for art's sake. Like that's amazing too. But I think that when we're designing products for an open market, thinking about what problem is it solving? What am I changing? What am I able to like make better about an already existing design is so important. And another thing that I'm very excited about, it's nowhere near coming to fruition at this point. I've been working on it for a whole year, but I am working with a team of people to make a fashion sketchbook that has plus size and like people's bodies of like different abilities. So people with like mobility aids and wheelchairs, making a fashion sketchbook that has them. Because one of the big things I learned when I started taking fashion classes was that we draw on croquis, which are just fashion figures essentially. And in the books I would get in school, it's all straight size, skinny, size 0 models. Like that's all of them. And I have no real faith that the fashion industry as it is right now is going to change. We have to change it at the beginning. We have to change it with the students. And if the students are going to keep drawing their designs on the same sized figure, how can we expect them to change? But if we give them these tools where they can design on a wider range of bodies, that's how we provide that change. So that's a big thing that I'm hoping we'll get. I was gonna self-publish it, but I really want to just make it available to like big fashion schools. So that's
Mm.
why it's been taking so much longer, because there's all this like legal stuff to get it like published and funded, and but that's been like a really cool thing that I've been working on. And I'm a doctorate student reached out to me, and they're working on it as part of their final project, which is so wild. Being on TikTok, I've had two different doctorate students involve me in their final projects as like an interview person or like as a supervisor. So yeah, I love TikTok. It's been such like, I know there's like a lot of stigma around it and all that kind of stuff, but it's been this incredible tool to like learn things. And I never thought that I would get to talk about my passion, which is accessibility and advocating for people and you know, different gender things and stuff. And I get to talk about it with like such a cool community of people.
That's really awesome. So I would love to talk about solar punk fashion. I kind of left that question open, but I don't know if you have ideas. I was just having sort of like a crazy brainstorm, like a coat that has solar panels on it or something, or like I saw someone's cloak design that was the cloak was split in the back to make like two wing shapes that looked like ladybug wings. I don't know. Like, do you have any cool solar punk fashion ideas you can leave people with?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I think solar punk is community based. So I really love something that is multi-purposeful and maybe also something that's shareable, like a coat that maybe is like a really nice heavy winter coat, but then in the spring or the fall it unzips to be two separate coats, so two people can wear like lighter coats.
I love that.
Yeah, I think that tying community in to fashion and like how can we make something again multi-purposeful as possible, so you just have to buy one thing but it can fit multiple needs, is very cool and feels very solar punk.
Definitely. Yeah. So, I guess we already touched on this a little bit, but uh, do you have any projects in mind you want to work on next, or just sort of like goals for your career or artistic goals?
That's a great question. I am in a weird space where I don't have a lot of huge goals. Like my fiance and I bought a house this year, with last year, which is never something I thought that I'd be able to do, but was in a really big part because of how well the moth bags did, which was incredible. I have stable housing. I'm able to provide for my fiance and myself and hopefully bring on some more people. I'm doing a lot of stuff creatively that I want to do. If anything, I think I get the privilege of saying I would like to garden more. I'd like to scrapbook more. There's a lot of non-work things that I want to do. As far as like work-related projects are though, like the fashion sketchbook is a huge one. I really want to create more educational tools that aren't necessarily for profit. Like, if I make a little bit of money off a sketchbook, great, but that's not the purpose of it. I'm really hoping, and we'll see with the economy and capitalism, but I'm hoping that I'm entering a period of my life where I can make things that have true like big community value. I know a lot of folks say that my work has a lot of community value for them specifically, but it's also hard when I have to make stuff in order to like sell it and make a living. So I'm excited to just make things that are more educational, more affordable. Yeah, the sketchbook's a really big one. I have more shoes I want to make. I've got another bag that I want to make that would be big enough to hold a gaming laptop, which would be really cool. And I got some fashion shows that I'm hoping to do next year. So yeah, I just gotta keep doing what I'm doing, and it feels weird to be at that point in my life, but it also very cool and exciting.
That's really great. I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you.
So, do you have any advice for people who want to get into accessible fashion?
I think the thing about the finding your third reason for wanting to create something is really important. Again, totally fine for you to like make stickers and make things that just pay your bills. But I think that when you deep dive into designs, think about what you're passionate about. What kind of problems do you want to solve? Because I guarantee that somebody else in the world has that problem, experiences that issue, and wants to solve it, but doesn't have like the means or the creativity or the drive to do so. I think that's a really big one. I mean, Google is your friend, honestly. Do some like really deep dive into stuff. Google's your friend, but also like your community is your friend. Even making just general like posts anywhere on the internet being like, what would you change about this thing? I think collaboration is some of the best things that can happen. Working with your community. I think inspiration comes from very unusual places too. Yeah, that's my advice for designers that want to do it. You just got to start doing it too. Like I started in a kitchen of like a small dorm apartment, and I just worked at it, and now I've got like my own studio and I do a bunch of different stuff, and it was really hard and it took a long time, but it is worth it. There are people that see your art and love it and appreciate it. You have a lot more silent supporters than you realize too.
That's a good point. Yeah. For everyone who comments, there's like 5 people who didn't.
Yep.
Maybe more than 5. Maybe that's a small number. I don't know.
It's so true though. The amount of people who even like comment something is so small compared to people who saw it or heard it and it made an impact on them.
Yeah.
And I can say that as someone who's a silent supporter of lots of people. I'm just not a big like commenter, but I'm trying to like change that because I know how much I like it when I get like a comment on something. But
Yeah, for anyone listening right now, that stuff helps.
yeah,
Review
that
this podcast. Check out
it
AJ's shop.
yes, it genuinely helps. But we have to remind ourselves that there are tons of silent supporters out there.
Definitely. So, before the big last question, do you have anything you want to plug? Any projects that are out, that are coming out really soon?
I mean, I guess check out my shop and my Patreon, which can be found under Pocketbean or Pocketbean Crafts. So many things are coming. Half of them I can't talk about yet. But more witchcraft tools, more bags, maybe a sketchbook in the next year.
Exciting.
Yeah.
So, this is the last question. You can sort of interpret it just however it comes to you. What does utopia look like to you?
Utopia looks like community to me. It looks like knowing the names of your neighbors. It looks like community gardens. It looks like problem solving. In some ways, it also looks like Star Trek. Because Star Trek exists in a world where money does not exist and there's no scarcity. And people follow their passions. We primarily see people who work and live aboard starships, but there's also people who run restaurants and money does not exist. They just love cooking and love connecting with people so much that all they do is just run their restaurant. So I guess the utopia looks like Star Trek to me is going to be my final.
I love that answer.
Unexpected answer, but my final answer.
Solarpunk Now is written, hosted, and produced by me, Luca Dowell. The Solarpunk theme song is by Red Keener on SoundCloud. My guest today was AJ of Pocketbean Crafts and Queering the Spotlight. You can find his storefront at pocketbeancrafts.com, Patreon at Pocketbean Crafts, or follow him at Pocketbean on Instagram and TikTok. You can also follow me on Twitter at SolarpunkCast, Mastodon at SolarpunkCast at Spore.social, or visit solarpunkcast.net for all episodes, including show notes. You can also visit solarpunkcast.net to donate to the show. Running a podcast takes time and money, and I do all of this myself, so your support is greatly appreciated. That's solarpunkcast.net, link in the description. And remember, the realization of any vision requires action. I strongly encourage you to get involved with local organizations whose goals align with the brighter future you want to see. Analysis is important, but we have to back it up with practice. Keep dreaming big, and keep up the good work.